What is up, everybody? Jake Rowe, DawgsHQ, Rusty Mansell, DawgsHQ, and listen, this is the day after the war was won, is what it feels like a little bit. George Rusty, the most clean, crisp, successful, all up, no down National Signing Day I can ever remember, and quite a few of them following or covering for the University of Georgia.
I tell you, to sum the day up, everybody got turned in early. All the, NLIs got turned in. Everybody was signed. Georgia released everything. And then you had the number one player in the state that you didn't have publicly the morning of. So you not only have a day like you had, but you also put the biggest cherry you can possibly put on top is the number one player in the state of Georgia, flipping KJ Bolden from Florida State to Georgia. So that is really how that day went, man. Like you don't see that very often, man. A non-drama number one ranking industry wide for Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, and it started about 7:45.
Yeah,
and then by I think it was 12:09, they had all 27 guys signed. Just absolutely drinking from a fire hose there. I mean, one of the biggest classes we've covered, and the fastest they've ever announced them. So it was just bananas. Yeah. And then we had to wait for the KJ thing. And Rusty, man, here's the deal.
Can we buy me a tripod?
Yeah, we will get you a tripod, buddy. We will get one.
I behaved all year. Can I get a tripod?
If I have to build you one like a set of old sawhorses, I will build you a tripod out of some 2x4s. No, we'll get you a Manfrotto or something. Okay. But on top of it all, just a little inside baseball here, dude. That live stream we put up on KJ's announcement went up without a hitch, man. Can you believe that? Like that probably surprised me more than anything. Was just those things never work. Like it never goes like you expect it to, and it did. And when we figured it out in 20 minutes, I just didn't think we were all that smart. I didn't think we all had the ability to do something like that.
No, I was listening. I was about to be DEFCON 3 there because it was starting to get crowded, and we couldn't get any signal in the building as normal. And I'm sitting there holding an iPhone, and people are standing beside me and got cameras. It looks like it's, they're zooming in on NASA. And I'm like, oh boy, but it's good, man. It worked out.
So let's talk about this KJ thing because we got called everything under the sun for a little bit there by some folks for suggesting that Georgia had an opportunity to get in the mix here. When do you think, and KJ can say what KJ wants to say, and he said he knew for a couple weeks, but when did you start to get the impression that coming off being committed to Florida State all year long, that Georgia was actually starting to kind of get in the door a little bit here?
Well, I was very careful with this one because I know the nature and I know how the kind of the pulse of things, but I wrote it behind the scenes, and if you haven't read that, kind of would push you there, but I'll give you one nugget out of that behind the scenes. December the 8th, I think Kirby went home visit that day or that morning, that night. I get a text from someone very close to him, and the text just read, and it was unsolicited, like just, like, hey, here, I'm going to tell you this. And the person told me, like, KJ's not going to be able to tell Kirby no a second time. And I thought, oh boy. That visit must have went well. So we exchanged some text about that visit, and I knew on December the 8th that I was going to have to pay attention to this, like it was going to get real. I knew there were going to be some twists and turns, and Auburn certainly definitely was in that thing at one point. But I whatever happened behind the scenes, I'm confident in this, that he could have taken NIL from any one of those three schools and been good and been fine. But at the end of the day, I've known KJ since he was a freshman, and I know his parents, I know his mom, I know his grandparents. They came to the On 3 NIL Elite Series, which was awesome. At the end of the day, the consistent message was KJ loves Kirby Smart, and Kirby Smart's a defensive back coach. So I knew that if it got tight with everything, I knew that Georgia had a kind of an ace in the hole, and that was Kirby Smart. And I think that relationship and KJ, I pulled KJ to the side yesterday after, he went through a ton of media. And, I like to get him after they kind of decompress for a second, let him breathe. He's got cameras in his face, and pull him aside, said, "You all right, man?" And he goes, "Yeah, we're talking about it." I said, what was the thing? And he said, "Man, just Kirby. I mean, Kirby, he was straight. He said he was straight with me. I think you guys wrote the story. I sent you the audio." He said, "Listen, he sent me a paragraph Sunday night, a text. And he said, you're going to have to live with this if you don't come here. Like, we want you. We always wanted you. You're our guy. You're an in-state kid. Come be great and let's do this thing together." And he said it meant the world to him, man. He said it meant the world to him to have that paragraph, and didn't read it, but it hit home with KJ. So I knew for about 2.5 weeks, man, that we better pay attention. But I had to be careful with it, Jake, because if you go to the board and say something like that and Georgia don't get them, people are like, they never were in it. Well, they were in it. They were in it. It didn't mean they were going to get him, but Georgia was really in that thing. But they had to be real careful how I worded it because it's just so sensitive. That one was sensitive.
Yeah, they don't hand out anything for second place, and oftentimes the team you cover is in it, and they don't get the guy, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like it's like a coping mechanism. You kind of get to a point where it's like, well, no, never had a chance. Well, Georgia definitely had a chance, and I mean, listen, it's a whole body of work. Our friend Matt Godwin, right, told me the day after KJ committed to Florida State, he said, "I still think Georgia's going to get him."
Yeah, I wrote the next day. Yeah, that one's not going to be over. They may not get him, but Matt understands it as well. Let me mention one thing. I won't cut you off because I see Eddie.
Go ahead.
Eddie from Ackworth brings up a question here. A lot of people on social media yesterday. Listen, the Dylan Raiola thing. I can tell you this: that KJ Bolden and Dylan Raiola are boys. Okay, and I didn't know how close they were, but yesterday the interaction between those two, they made sure they took a bunch of pictures together. They're cutting up together. They're over there, they're being high school kids. So those things with, I don't know who, what, when, or where it started that, he wouldn't have went without Dylan Raiola. And that to me had nothing to do with his decision. And he's really tight with Edric Houston. Well, Edric Houston was never going to Georgia. So, I don't know the narrative there, but you can squash that. I mean, I watched the two families. And I watched those two young men, and they were both happy for each other, and they made their decisions and went on. So I don't want to get into people starting to bash, another kid saying this or that there was no animosity between those two kids. I can assure you, I stood there yesterday and watched them take 20 pictures together and hang out and interact. So there was no, I sensed nothing on that subject.
Well, Eddie also brings up the idea that maybe it freed up some NIL money. And listen, we're not going to get into that part either. We're talking about other folks' money, and maybe it did, maybe it didn't. From what we know about Georgia, Georgia isn't trying to, nor is it committed to trying to win these big NIL battles. At the end of the day, places like Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State are the ones you hear of the most often. I'm sure they're putting together pretty packages.
Sorry, I read your. I'm let me reply to Eddie too. I'm sorry about that. I got the question there. I have nothing to understand, but I got a bunch of texts last night and I read that too quick. Yeah. But there was no animosity between those two kids.
But when it comes to that whole NIL thing, I mean, it's Georgia doesn't have to, and it shouldn't. The sustainability part of it's there, and Georgia's not going into these battles saying, "Listen, we got to come up with a lot of money and win this Bidden War." It's just not the way we hear that Georgia handles it, and that's not. Listen, right or wrong, we got a lot of folks that seem to think Georgia should win all those because it can, but
they don't have the money to win all of them. They don't have the money to win all of them.
Right. Yeah.
They're competitive.
Exactly.
They're very
really nobody's got the money to win all of them, or everybody would have all the kids.
That's right. That's right. I mean? You have to make decisions. You have to make decisions of what neighborhood you can afford to live in. They are competitive in the NIL market, but I think people think, well, let's just keep throwing it that money until we get it. And that's not how that's not how it's going to happen in Athens. They're not going to win bidding wars. And that's why I told you on DawgsHQ, and Jake Rose said the same thing. Very confident that Walter Nolan was not going to end up at Georgia, or Georgia was not seriously in that thing, because that one's going somewhere else. And lo and behold, Oregon and Ole Miss. So
less than 24 hours.
yeah,
After he said it. So,
We'll
I mean, it's that's just the way it is. And
yeah.
another way I want to look at this KJ Bolden thing, Rusty, is so we're not knee jerk over at DawgsHQ. That's one thing. We're not gonna just fly off the handle about things. And there was this narrative when KJ committed to Florida State that Georgia just couldn't get elite safeties. Like it just couldn't. It's amazing how one guy kind of changes that, because now you look back at the last three classes and it's Malachi Starks, it's Jonell Aguero, and it's KJ Bolden. They missed on Caleb Downs. Okay. Like
they tried.
They went hard after him, but they've got 3 out of their 4 most elite safety prospects in the last 3 classes. And I'll tell you what, man, one thing I love about KJ, and I've said this over and over and over again, he's not going to play corner at Georgia, but if they wanted him to, he could play it. And I think he can play it. I think he can play it well. He may play star. He may play safety at Georgia. But I'm telling you, man, I have not encountered – I think as he's more in that Malachi Starks mold than he is the Caleb Downs mold, whereas Caleb Downs is an elite safety prospect. Yeah. I think those two may be a little bit more spread thin in terms of what they can do. But ultimately, man, I mean, 2 out of the last 3 classes getting the top safety in the state of Georgia, filling in with Jonell Aguero, who they would have taken with Caleb Downs if they could have gotten him. And then you add in Ellis Robinson, you add in the experience pieces Georgia has in the secondary, DeMello Jones, who we talked about him this morning. I don't know if I could name 5 better players in Georgia, much less 10. And he is a big-time prospect, too. I mean, I really like what Georgia's doing in defensive backfield. And then Andre Evans, you're sitting there like, what is it going to shock you if a couple years from now he's a stud? Not at all. So, I mean, they continue to recruit that back half extremely well.
Raw athlete. I talked with some people in Nashville yesterday because I was talking about London Humphreys. And by the way, London Humphreys, people just rave about, like, super freaky athlete. Andre Evans, I know Georgia took him kind of as a, he has the measurables and, what can you make out of him? So, those are the type. They did the same thing with a guy named Eric Stokes, who, by the way, had very little defensive back experience, very little. He was a running back in high school, and Georgia took Eric Stokes 3 years into a first-round draft pick. So, see what happens there. But you look at the defensive backs. I feel like when you got Kirby Smart, you got Will Muschamp, and as long as you got those two with their backgrounds, their resumes, and who they have recruited, feel pretty good about the defensive backs.
Let's close up our talk about National Signing Day before we kind of preview what's next. Pick a guy for me in this class, any guy that has kind of been on your mind throughout the process. You like him. Maybe you like him more than anybody else. Maybe he's just a really good kid. Maybe you just, you think he has the biggest upside. Just one guy that's kind of stood out to you throughout this process for this signing class, because God knows there's a lot to choose from. 28 guys.
Yeah, dude, you could really.
It's hard to put a finger on one guy.
I'll say this because how he has handled this in this day and age, and how rare it is. Now, what's his ceiling at Georgia? I don't know. We'll find out. But I know this, that coming into college, his mindset, his skill set, and how he is wired right now, he's going to be successful, and that's Ryan Puglisi. Because if Ryan Puglisi would have decommitted from Georgia, and let's just say December the 1st, let's just say he did it December the 1st, there is no telling how wild it would have got for him and the money value it would have got for him. Because someone like that, another year, another senior year, another year tape, and people seeing him, that thing would have gotten – it would have got wild. But he never let it get there. He never wavered. He told Ohio State, do not call me again, respectfully. He said, look, I'm done, guys. I'm going to Georgia. That was back in the end of May. And, for what he is and how he's wired, I'm telling you, man, this kid's an alpha. He's not going to be asked to play right now, which is, it gives him time to develop, gives him time to get his feet wet in the SEC. But I'm telling you, though, the intangibles of him walking into Athens, those are the types that are working out.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going with a little bit of my below the fall line bias here. Nasir Johnson is a guy that I love him.
Yeah.
I think his senior film is really good. Rusty, I feel like he's one of those guys that is probably kind of just starting to hit the upslope on what he can be.
Oh, yeah.
And when you look at a guy like that, I mean, I feel like he's one of those guys. If he comes in and he works like they're going to want him to work, and if he does what he's coached to do, I think he's a potential All-American down the road. I think he's a potential high draft pick, first-round pick, kind of maybe a little bit of a bigger version of Devontae Wyatt in some ways, like a bigger frame.
Yep.
The sooner the better for Georgia, obviously, because they want those big dudes on the offensive line. And I think he's a guy that's both raw and talented, but also developmental and can be as good as he wants to be. Let's look at what's next. Talking about the defensive line, and had a piece up this morning over at DawgsHQ about kind of what's next for Georgia in the transfer portal. I'm not going to get into any specific names, but it sounds like they're bound for some good news here in the near future.
Yeah, I think you're gonna get a defensive line some news pretty soon, and you added that in. I'm making some notes right now that should be up here in the next 30, 45 minutes on what I think is about to happen in the portal. And I'll say this one really interesting note. And
I'd say so.
Yeah, this one's pretty interesting, and I've seen this play out before. So, I'm sitting here last night and I get hit with that from a source. I'm like, wait a minute. Well, that would make sense based off what I heard the first part of that. So we'll see. But Georgia's going to be involved in the portal. Here's what I can tell you: Georgia's not bringing in anybody in the portal that they don't think can help them right now. Like it doesn't mean you have to start, but you're going to be playing. So Georgia, Georgia has to close some things down. I think you're going to get some answers on portal pretty soon. I think for the weeks out, you're going to have 2, maybe 3 answers from portal guys. And pretty interesting note I'm going to put up this morning that I don't think you've seen anywhere yet. So we'll see.
And listen, it's just really getting started. I mean, it's hard to believe that after yesterday morning. I really thought we were going to have to institutionalize Jay Gruce for about 20 minutes there yesterday morning. He was having a time. Him and Jeremy Johnson both, because they went in, they wrote individual stories on every signee. But what you don't understand, guys, is you got to go in, you got to optimize those stories for publishing at the last second, do every little thing, update timestamps and all that. And when you're trying to finish one and they drop 2 more before you can do that, and we're trying to distribute them out to socials and everything like that, it was all 4 men could possibly handle. That's how fast they were coming in. I hit Bernard, Justin Williams' dad, up last night. He said, "Man, what a day." And I hit him up, and I just hit him with a gif of a man just getting sprayed with a fire hose. And he just started laughing. I said, "Dude, it was machine gun." But listen, man, an incredible signing day for Georgia. 28 prospects, locked up the #1 class, got KJ Bolden. And like I said, we're just getting started. We'll be back with you Sunday night with the Georgia show, our only PM show, Bark After Dark on Monday, and then 2 shows next week. Actually, there will be no Bark After. I think Monday's Christmas, actually.
Yeah,
we won't be back on Monday or Sunday. We'll be back with you after Christmas live from Miami, me and Palmer, because we'll be down that way. So, I forgot about that. So next up's the Orange Bowl and transfer portal. So get ready for it, folks, and we'll check it with you later on.